She designed every beam, not as a figure of speech, not the way people say they built something when they mean they supervised, or they oversaw, or they signed off on someone else's work and put their name at the bottom. She designed every beam in the specific technical sense. She calculated the loads, checked the tolerances, argued with the structural engineer on the third floor review, until he admitted she was right and changed the spec sheet, and then checked his revised numbers herself before she signed anything. She specified every stone. The Carrara marble in the lobby came from a single quarry in Tuscany that she had contacted directly after rejecting 2 other suppliers, because the veining in their samples ran the wrong direction. Horizontal, which would make the floor look restless, busy, like something unresolved. She needed vertical. She needed the pale grey lines to draw the eye upward toward the ceiling height she had fought the city planning office to approve. She flew to Italy on a Friday, stood in the quarry yard on a Saturday, pointed at the correct block, and flew home on a Sunday. The contractor had called it excessive. She had told him that excessive was a word people used when they didn't understand what they were looking at. She had argued with 3 contractors, and won, and the marble was exactly right. She drew the load calculations by hand the first time, in pencil, on a drafting table in a one-room studio in Lagos, because the software license hadn't cleared yet and she wasn't willing to wait. She reworked the executive floor layout 6 times until the sightlines were exactly as she needed them, until you could stand at the elevator doors and see all the way to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and through them to the Seoul skyline, and beyond that to the Han River catching the light, and you felt, without anyone telling you, that you had arrived somewhere that mattered. That building was hers. Not on paper, not in any contract, not on the brass plaques near the entrance, which said Quan Global Holdings in clean sans serif capitals, with no other name attached. Not in any public record that would tell a stranger, walking in off the Gangnam street, whose mind had made this particular arrangement of glass and steel and Italian stone rise 43 stories as above the city and hold. Hers in the way that matters more than paper, in the 10,000 decisions that keep a building upright and make it worth entering, in the curtain wall angle that kept the west side cool through Korean summers, in the acoustic underlay beneath the marble which she had specified after lying on the lobby floor, with her ear pressed to the subfloor for 20 minutes while the construction crew stood at a careful distance and pretended not to watch. She had built something that would stand long after anyone inside it could remember whose idea it was. Then she walked through the front door and was told she didn't belong there. The Quan Global Holdings Tower rose 43 stories above the Gangnam district, and on a clear morning it caught the light in a way that looked almost accidental, as though the building had simply decided on its own to be beautiful. Isabella knew better. She had run the sun angle calculations herself in November, standing on the pavement below at 8 in the morning, with her phone's compass and a coffee going cold in her other hand, watching the light move across the curtain wall panels she had argued about for 2 weeks. The glazing contractor had wanted a darker tint, more dramatic, he said, more imposing. She had told him that a building didn't need to be imposing. It needed to be right. The difference between those 2 things was the difference between a building people admired from the street and a building people felt something inside of. She wanted the second kind. She had one. She usually did, on the things that mattered. At 9:14 a.m., she walked through the revolving door with a leather portfolio under her arm and the executive floor redesign blueprints rolled inside. The lobby received her the way it always had. Cool, unhurried, marble underfoot, the particular smell of recycled air and money that she had never been able to fully describe to anyone who hadn't spent time in buildings like this. The silence was the thing she was proudest of. Not absence of sound, exactly, but a quality of the air that made people drop their voices without deciding to, made them move a little more carefully, as though the space itself had asked them to pay attention. She had specified that. The acoustic underlay, the ceiling height, 2 extra meters that she had fought the city planning office for across 4 separate meetings. The distance between the reception desk and the elevator bank, which she had measured and remeasured until the proportions created exactly the sense of arrival she was after. Held breath. That was how she thought of it. A lobby should feel like a held breath. She had walked through this one 100 times, when it existed only on drafting paper, when it was a construction site full of noise and dust and men who called her miss until she corrected them, and then called her ma'am, which was only marginally better. When Du-jin had carried her across the threshold on opening day, laughing, his arms around her before she could object, while the security team found somewhere else to look. Today felt different in a way she couldn't have named yet. The receptionist was someone she had never seen before. Young, phone to her ear, eyes that lifted briefly from the desk when Isabella approached, and then moved past her in the particular way of someone who has already made a decision about what they're looking at. Not unkind, exactly, just absent. The specific quality of attention that made a person feel like furniture. Isabella set her portfolio on the counter. She was wearing a cream blazer, pressed blueprints under her arm. She looked like exactly what she was. She waited anyway. She had spent her entire career waiting for rooms to catch up to that fact. One moment. The receptionist set the phone down, but her eyes went right, to the elevator bank, to some point past Isabella's left shoulder, before settling back with the careful, practiced neutrality of someone trained to be polite in a way that stops just short of warm. It was a specific skill Isabella had noticed over the years. Some people were taught it. Others came to it naturally. Good morning. I'm here for the executive floor redesign review. My name is... One moment, she said again, and picked the phone back up. Isabella stood. She set her portfolio against the counter edge and let her hands rest. The lobby held its silence around her, the silence she had built, the held breath quality of the space, and she let herself exist inside it without rushing it. She thought about Lagos, about the 3rd-year structural design course at the architecture faculty, where she had been the only woman, which she had understood by the 2nd week, and decided not to spend energy on, because energy spent on the fact of a room's composition was energy not spent on the work. The professor had handed back her load-bearing analysis at the end of semester with a single red checkmark in the top corner and no written comment, and she had known by then that this was his highest form of praise, that he saved his words for the work he found wanting, and said nothing when he had nothing to correct. She had held that checkmark like a key. She thought about the firm in Seoul. 3 years of arriving early and leaving late, of watching her decisions about sightlines and material weights migrate over the course of revision cycles into presentations delivered by senior architects whose names were on the door. She had never said anything, not because she was afraid, but because she was building something else at the same time. A record, a reputation, a body of work that existed in the buildings themselves, in the calculations that held, in the structures that stood. You could take someone's name off a drawing. You could not take their judgment out of a wall. She had waited through all of it. Patience was not weakness. Patience was the thing you held in your hands while you kept working, the counterweight that kept you level when everything else was trying to tip you. But she knew the difference. She had always known it. The difference between waiting your turn and being made to wait because someone had looked at you. Quickly, partially with their mind already made up, and decided your turn wasn't on the schedule. The receptionist set the phone down. This time she looked at Isabella properly, with the expression of someone trying to work out what category applies before committing to a response. "Can I help you?" she said, as though Isabella hadn't already told her, as though the last 2 minutes had simply not occurred. "I'm here for the executive floor redesign review," Isabella said evenly. "My name is Isabella Quan." The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Micha stepped out wearing a grey suit that fit her like a verdict. Clipboard in hand, expression already arranged. Not settling into place as she crossed the lobby, but already there, fully formed, the particular set of features that said she had assessed this situation before she saw it and had nothing left to revise. She had been Du-jin's secretary since before Quan Global had a lobby to stand in. Since the days when his office was a room above a noodle shop in Itaewon and his calendar existed as a burner phone and a set of conversations that didn't get written down. She had moved with him through every iteration of what he was building. Through the years when the money was dangerous and the years when it became legitimate, and the long middle period when it was both at once. She had survived boardroom disputes and regulatory inquiries, and at least 2 situations that Isabella had never been told the full details of, and probably never would be. She was efficient. She was loyal. She was absolutely certain, in the way of someone who has been trusted for a long time, that her job was to protect the structure of Du-jin's world from anything that might introduce disorder into it. It had never once occurred to her to ask who got to define disorder, who decided what belonged inside the structure and what threatened it. Those were not questions she had been given reason to examine. The list said what it said. The floor was restricted. Her job was the door. "Can I help you?" Isabella extended her hand. "Isabella Quan. I'm here for the executive floor redesign review." Micha didn't take it. The hand stayed where it was, offered, open, waiting, for a beat that lasted long enough for everyone within sight of the reception desk to understand exactly what was happening. Then Isabella lowered it, slowly, without changing her expression, and the unmet gesture settled into the air between them like a thing that had been said out loud. "Mr. Tough One is not in the building today. The executive floor is restricted to authorized personnel. I'm authorized. I hold the architectural license for this building, on file with the city of Seoul. Mrs. Quan." Micha's voice dropped. Not louder, not harder, but quieter, sharpened, the way a blade goes quiet when it's placed on a surface, rather than swung through the air. "I understand you have a personal connection to Mr. Quan. But corporate policy requires all visitors to the executive floor to be on the access list. You are not on it." "I'm not a visitor. I designed the building." Micha's smile did not move. It had not moved since she stepped out of the elevator, which meant it was not a smile in any real sense. It was a position, a held line. "I manage who enters that floor," she said, "and you are not on the list." Isabella reached for her phone. She was going to call Du-jin's direct line, not because she needed him to come down, not because she couldn't handle this herself, but because she wanted there to be a record. A timestamp, a call log that said, "I tried to resolve this the correct way." Micha's hand shot out and closed around her wrist. The lobby went absolutely still. The receptionist's fingers stopped moving above her keyboard. The 2 security guards near the entrance straightened, weight shifting forward, doing the math. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "You're going to ask me to leave," Isabella said, very calmly. "A building I designed. I'm going to tell security to escort you out." The guards moved. One of them, young, earnest, clearly new enough to this building that he didn't know its history, put his hand on Isabella's arm. She didn't pull away. She stood the way she had learned to stand in rooms that didn't expect her. Completely still, completely present, taking up exactly the space she was entitled to. And then Micha did something that could not be undone. She picked up the coffee cup from the reception desk, the cup the receptionist had poured as a courtesy gesture when Isabella walked in, the one sitting at the corner of the desks, pale and steaming, and she threw it. Not at the wall, not at the floor. At Isabella's chest, the hot liquid soaked through the cream blazer in a dark, spreading bloom. It hit the blueprints Isabella was holding and ran along the paper edges. The cup hit the portfolio and bounced and clattered across the Italian Carrara marble with a sound like a gunshot in a cathedral. "An accident," Micha said. "You startled me." The receptionist looked away. The security guards did not move. Isabella stood in the lobby of her building, coffee dripping from the blueprints she had drawn, onto the floor she had specified, into the grout lines she had argued with 3 contractors to get exactly right. She watched the dark liquid spread and thought of nothing except how many hours she had spent on her knees checking those joints. She did not cry. She did not speak. She stood very still, and she thought about cameras. There was something in the quality of Isabella's stillness that did that to a room. It wasn't passivity. It wasn't shock. It was the stillness of a person who has done the math and is waiting for everyone else to catch up to the answer. She reached out and set the ruined blueprints on the reception desk. She placed them with precision, squaring the edges against the desk's corner, taking the space she needed without asking for it, smoothing one hand across the soaked top sheet, even though the paper had already warped beyond saving. It was not a gesture of defeat. It was a gesture of record. She was leaving something behind, and she was leaving it deliberately, and everyone watching understood, without being told that this was intentional. Then she looked at Micha. "You're right about one thing," she said. Her voice was exactly what it had been when she walked in. Even, clear, the temperature of a woman who has spent her career being precise about things that matter and has never once flinched from a number that came back wrong. This is a corporate headquarters, and in a corporate headquarters there are cameras. Something crossed Micha's face. It was quick. A flicker behind the eyes, a tiny recalculation. The specific micro-expression of someone who has just understood that the ground they were standing on is not as solid as they believed. It lasted less than a second. But Isabella saw it, and Micha saw that Isabella saw it. And for one moment, the two of them were the only people in the lobby, looking at each other across the full weight of what had just happened, and what was going to happen next. Then Isabella straightened her blazer, both hands, smoothing the soaked fabric down the front with the same unhurried care she had given the blueprints. Not because it would help. The coffee was already through to the lining, but because the gesture meant something and she intended it to. She picked up her portfolio, she turned toward the door, and she walked out. Not quickly, not with her shoulders pulled in, or her eyes down, or the compressed, diminished gait of someone absorbing a defeat. She walked the way she had walked across the graduation stage in Lagos in the rains. The year the professor, who had written unlikely to complete in her first-term review, was sitting in the second row and had to watch her name get called. She walked the way she had walked into Du-jin's office for the first time, toward the problem, not away from it. She walked like the ground was hers. It was. She had specified the underlay. Du-jin was on the 40th floor. He had been there since 6 in the morning, in a meeting that had no scheduled end time, because he had not given it one. The curtains were drawn against the early light. His phone lay face down on the table beside a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. His security team had 2 standing instructions for mornings like this. No interruptions for anything short of a fire, and immediate interruptions for anything involving his wife. In 11 years, the second condition had never been triggered. Chief Park opened the door at 9:22 a.m. The 4 men at the table understood immediately that something had changed. Not because of anything Chief Park said. He hadn't said anything yet, but because of the simple fact of the open door and the quality of the silence that came through it. These were men who had sat across tables from Du-jin through negotiations that decided the shape of things for years afterward. They knew how to read a room. They went still in the particular way of people who have assessed a situation and concluded that the correct response is to take up less space. Chief Park had been with Du-jin for 11 years. He had taken a bullet in Busan, a situation that was not discussed in detail but that everyone in this room knew about, and had not made a sound about it until the debrief 3 days later, when a doctor asked him to describe the pain on a scale of 1 to 10, and he had said 4, which the doctor had not believed. He had delivered news that ended careers. He had delivered other kinds of news on 2 occasions that were not spoken about outside the relevant rooms. He did not interrupt meetings. Sir. His voice was level, carefully, deliberately level, the specific evenness of a man who is working to maintain it and is aware that the effort itself is audible. Your wife was escorted out of the building. Du-jin did not move. He was looking at the documents in front of him. Quarterly projections, acquisition terms, columns of figures that represented years of accumulated work and decision-making. But his eyes had stopped processing what they saw. The page was just a surface now. "Escorted out," he said, "on the order of Secretary Yoon, by our security team." Chief Park paused. It was a short pause. 2 seconds, perhaps 3. But this was a man who had reported a bullet wound as a 4. The pause said everything the words hadn't. "Coffee was thrown on her, sir. The lobby cameras have the footage." Du-jin placed his pen on the table. It was a Mont Blanc, Isabella's gift on their first anniversary, engraved with the GPS coordinates of the construction site where they had met, where she had walked up to him in a hard hat, someone he had never seen before, and told him his contractor was stealing from him, and his building's load calculations were wrong, and if he didn't act today, he would regret it for the rest of the project. She had been entirely correct. She always was, about structures. He set the pen down, the way you set down something you love when your hands are no longer safe. "Show me," he said. The lobby footage was 47 seconds long. Du-jin watched it in his office, alone, standing in front of his desk with the monitor turned toward him. Chief Park stood near the door. The lieutenants had been dismissed. The room was very quiet. He watched Micha step out of the elevator. He watched the conversation he couldn't hear, could read in the set of shoulders, the refused handshake, the particular angle of Micha's head that he recognized as her settling into a position she had no intention of leaving. He had seen that angle across boardroom tables. He had relied on it, once. He watched the guard put his hand on Isabella's arm. He watched the coffee cup leave Micha's hand. He watched his wife stand in the lobby of the building she had designed, soaked, still holding her portfolio, and he watched her not break. Watched her place the blueprints on the desk with the same care she gave everything she touched. Watched her say something to Micha that made Micha's expression change for just a second before it locked back down. He watched Isabella walk out. He watched the exact way she walked, head level, pace unhurried, like a woman leaving a room she intended to return to. The footage ended. Du-jin stood for a moment. Then he buttoned his jacket. He straightened his cuffs. He looked at Chief Park. "Bring the car around." "Sir, you're 11 o'clock. Bring the car around to the front entrance, not the private one." Chief Park understood the difference. The private entrance was for discretion, for arrivals and departures that the building didn't need to witness. The front entrance was for something else. It was for statements, for things you wanted the building to see and remember. "Yes, sir," Chief Park said, and reached for his radio. When the elevator opened on the ground floor, the sound moved through the lobby like a change in air pressure. Du-jin walked out, flanked by Chief Park and 2 security officers. He was not hurrying. There was no urgency in his pace. Urgency would have suggested that the situation was in doubt, that the outcome was still being determined, and it wasn't. It had been determined 40 floors up, in the 8 seconds between Chief Park's pause and Du-jin setting down his pen. Everything happening now was consequence. Consequence did not need to rush. His shoes made no sound on the marble. Isabella had shown him the product sheet for the acoustic underlay the week they finalized the lobby specifications. Had explained the difference between a floor that absorbed and a floor that amplified. Had talked about what it did to the psychology of a space, how people moved differently in silence, how they became more careful and more present. He had listened and trusted her judgment the way he trusted it on everything structural. He had not fully understood, at the time, what she meant. He understood it now. The lobby was absolutely quiet, and every person in it felt the weight of that quiet and had gone still inside it. Micha was at the reception desk. She saw him the moment the elevator opened, saw him cross the marble toward her, and her face went the color of paper left too long in the light. Not white. Older than white. The color of something that has had the life slowly drawn out of it. He walked past her. He kept walking until he was standing in the exact spot on the floor where the stain was. Dark in the grout line, already drying into the stone. The Carrara marble she had flown to Italy to source. The floor she had lain down on during construction with her ear pressed to the subfloor, checking the acoustic return. The surface that existed in this form, in this building, in this city, because she had believed in what it could be before there was anything here to believe in. He looked at it for a moment, then, without looking up. "Who touched my wife?" The lobby did not breathe. "Sir, I can explain," Micha began. "I'm not speaking to you," still looking at the stain. His voice had not changed temperature. That was the thing about Du-jin that people who didn't know him sometimes mistook for calm. It wasn't calm, it was precision. "Chief Park, who put their hands on my wife?" Lobby camera shows Secretary Yoon grabbing Mrs. Quan's wrist. Security officer Kim Seung-ho placed his hand on her arm to escort her out. Du-jin looked up. He looked at Micha, and Micha, who had held the line through everything this organization had passed through, who had never once broken under pressure, felt something she had no name for until it arrived. Not anger, not threat. The bottomless weight of his disappointment, which was worse than either, because anger had edges and this had none. 7 years, he said, and you never understood what this building was. He turned to the receptionist. "Call my wife. Tell her she is welcome in her own home." Then to Micha, with the finality of a door closing. "She builds things. You just try to keep people out of them. That is the difference between you." He walked out through the front entrance, into the light, where the city was waiting. Isabella was at the kitchen counter when he came in. The ruined blueprints were unrolled in front of her. Coffee. The paper warped at the edges where the liquid had soaked through. She had a fresh sheet laid over the top of them, a pencil in her hand. She was redrawing from memory. Du-jin stood in the doorway and looked at her. He had crossed the city to get here, and he had not once rehearsed what he was going to say, because he did not know yet what she needed him to say. That was unusual for him. He was a man who knew, in most situations, exactly what the room required. She didn't look up. "I know you saw the footage." "I did." She made a mark on the paper. Her hand was steady. He watched her work for a moment. The precise economy of her lines, the way she moved through the drawing, like she was remembering a conversation rather than reconstructing a document. "I'm redesigning the executive floor access protocol as well," she said. "If a secretary can override building security to remove the licensed architect from her own site, the protocol is broken. I'm fixing it. Isabella." She looked up, and there it was, not brokenness, not anger, but something more complicated than both. The particular look of a person who has been through something they didn't deserve, and is not going to let it define the afternoon. "I don't need you to save me, Du-jin. I need you to let me fix this." He studied her face. The coffee stain was still on her blazer. She hadn't changed yet, had come straight home and sat down and started drawing, because that was what she did when something was wrong. She found the problem and she worked on it. He nodded. Once, the way he nodded when he trusted someone completely. "The board meeting is Thursday," he said. "The floor redesign is on the agenda. I know." She looked back down at the blueprints. "I wrote the agenda." The boardroom was on the 41st floor, and the light came in from the east in the mornings, falling across the long table at the angle Isabella had intended. Warm, directional. The kind of light that made people feel, without quite knowing why, that the room was paying attention. The executive team filled the chairs. 6 vice presidents, the CFO, the general counsel, and at the far end of the table, positioned with the particular care of someone who believes that distance creates safety, Secretary Yoon Mi-cha. Du-jin called the meeting to order. The first item on the agenda was the executive floor redesign. The presentation will be given by the lead architect, he said. Micha's pen stopped moving. The door opened. Isabella walked in wearing a black blazer, not the cream one, not the one that was currently in a dry cleaning bag with a coffee stain she had not yet decided whether to remove or keep as a record. This one was new, sharp-shouldered, the kind of garment that didn't apologize for itself. Under her arm, the blueprints, not the ruined ones. New ones, drawn from memory and sharpened in the redrawing, better than the originals in 3 specific technical ways she had noticed only when forced to reconstruct them. She set them on the table without hurrying. She looked around the room, met each set of eyes in turn briefly, with the complete absence of apology. Good morning. I'm Isabella Quan. I designed this building. I'll be presenting the executive floor redesign, which includes a revised access control protocol that takes effect today. She turned to the first drawing. The previous protocol had a single point of failure. One individual with unchecked authority to control executive floor access without cross-verification. That has been corrected. As of 8 this morning, all access requires dual verification, departmental approval and clearance from the architectural office. She paused. Let it land. The architectural office reports to me. The room was perfectly still. Micha was looking at the table. Isabella finished her presentation and sat down. The room held the particular quality of a space that has just received a great deal of information and is still integrating it. The new blueprints were spread across the table. Sharper than the originals, clarified by the process of reconstruction, the way some things come back from damage better than they started. 6 vice presidents, the CFO, the general counsel, Micha at the far end where distance had seemed, an hour ago, like a reasonable strategy. Du-jin looked at his notes. It was a brief pause, formal, deliberate, the kind that functions as punctuation. A signal that one kind of business had concluded and another was beginning. The next agenda item, he said, is a personnel matter. The room understood before he continued. That was the thing about rooms like this. They were full of people who had survived long enough in this organization to read the air correctly. No one turned toward Micha. No one's eyes moved to the far end of the table. The absence of that instinct, which would have been natural, which would have been human, was its own verdict. You looked at a person when their situation was still uncertain. When it wasn't, you found somewhere else to be. Secretary Yoon. Du-jin's voice was exactly what it had been all morning. Level even. The temperature of a man for whom consequence is simply the step that follows action, as structural and impersonal as gravity. On Monday, you grabbed a board stakeholder by the wrist in the lobby of this building, ordered security to physically remove her from the premises, and threw a beverage at her. All of this was captured on the lobby cameras, which you yourself referenced during the incident. Micha pushed her chair back and stood. Mr. Quan, she is not a board member. Mrs. Quan holds the architectural license for this building, which grants her registered stakeholder status with full site access authority. That status was confirmed by our general counsel this morning and entered into the building's access registry at 9 a.m. He had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. You removed a stakeholder from her own registered site and physically assaulted her in the process. I didn't. The coffee was. The footage has been preserved. The board has reviewed it. The receptionist has submitted a written account. The security officer has submitted a statement. He looked at her then, directly, with the full weight of 7 years of professional trust being placed on the table between them and pushed across it, out of reach. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Micha looked around the room. The CFO was looking at his hands. The vice presidents had found various points of interest in the middle distance. The general counsel, who had spent the morning constructing the legal framework for this moment with the same care Isabella had given the access protocol, was reviewing his notes. No one met her eyes. There was nothing left to witness. I have worked for you for 7 years. And in 7 years, Du-jin said, You never once asked yourself why I married a woman who designs buildings instead of one who manages schedules. It's because she builds things that last. You were protecting something you thought was mine. This building was never mine. It was hers from the first line she drew. Mi-cha left. The door closed behind her, not slammed, not loud, just shut with the clean finality of a sentence that has reached its end. Isabella unrolled the next drawing. No one interrupted. 3 weeks later, a portrait was hung in the lobby of Quan Global Holdings. It showed a woman standing inside a building that was still in the process of becoming one, steel framework overhead. Open to the sky in places, concrete floors underfoot, the air carrying that particular mixture of dust and possibility that exists only in the interval between a foundation and a finished thing. She had her hard hat under her arm rather than on her head, because she had taken it off to look up. And that was the moment the painter had caught. Her face tipped toward the incomplete ceiling, blueprints in her hand, reading the structure the way a person reads something written in their own handwriting. Not checking it, recognizing it. The brass plate on the frame read, Isabella Quan, architect of this house. Du-jin had given the painter every photograph from the construction period. He had kept them all on a personal server sorted by date from the first site visit when there was nothing here but a cleared lot and Isabella crouching at the corner of it with a compass and a notebook to the day she pressed the building's keys into his hand and told him the punch list was complete. The painter had spent 3 weeks on the portrait. When it was finished, Du-jin had carried it down to the lobby himself and told the installation team exactly where he wanted it. Directly opposite the main entrance, centered on the wall, so that it was the first thing a person saw when they came through the revolving door, before the reception desk, before the elevator bank, before anything else the building had to offer. Isabella found out on a Tuesday morning when she walked in and stopped. She stood in front of it while the lobby moved around her. Arrivals, departures, the ordinary circulation of a building in full use. People who stepped around her without breaking stride because they had somewhere to be. She didn't move. She looked at the version of herself that existed before any of this did, when the building was still only numbers and decisions, and her refusal to let either of those things be wrong, when it lived nowhere except her drafting table and the specific quality of her belief in it. You didn't have to do this, she said. Du-jin was beside her. He had been in the lobby since 7:30, waiting, which was not a thing he did, and which had caused his security team a quiet, sustained confusion they were too professional to voice. I didn't do it for you, he said. I did it for everyone who comes through that door, so they know whose vision they're standing in, so that no one who looks like you, or like the person behind them, or the one who hasn't arrived yet, ever has to wonder if they belong here. Isabella looked at the portrait for a moment longer. Then she looked at him. I belong everywhere I choose to stand. I know, he said. Now they do too. The lobby held its silence around them, the quiet she had built, the acoustics she had specified, the particular quality of stillness that made people feel, without knowing why, that the space was paying attention. The coffee stain was gone from the marble. The Carrara stone was pale and unbroken, the grout lines exactly as she had drawn them years ago, in a studio in Lagos, with a pencil and no software, and nothing but the certainty that she was going to get this right. Some stains don't come out of stone, and some women don't come undone.